Good evening. You're watching Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are going to talk the news, national news of the day, and it's hard to decide what the biggest news is, but I think the biggest news comes from, again, the war. The war is entering a new phase. We talked about it last week. It's been the discussion of the mainstream media as well as open source media as the new Donetsk offensive, as they're calling it, has started, apparently with Russian troops intending to encircle the Eastern Army and consolidate control of Donetsk and Luhansk, if I'm saying that right. I've been reading it and I haven't heard it said. And in the meantime, trying to consolidate by demanding the surrender of all partisan resistors and military resistors in Mariupol, which they believe is down to just a few in a steel plant. They are not surrendering, so that fight continues. And of course, as we discussed too, the flagship Moscow was sunk last week. Pretty much confirmed that it was Ukrainian missiles that hit the ship's missiles. That is the flagship of the Black Sea fleet of Russia. It greatly reduces their missile sending capability. On the top of it, it sank to the bottom of the Black Sea, along with reportedly 2 nuclear missiles. May be a concern down the road, but one thing at a time. And anyway, the biggest development, however, recently is there has been confirmations that a mystery country has delivered over 20 mystery planes plus MiGs plus a whole lot of spare parts that will replenish and expand the Ukraine Air Force considerably. Now, we have spoken on this show, and it's been a lot of talk about Poland having wanted to hand over the 29 planes it had to NATO and have us hand it to give it to Ukraine. Apparently, if the reports are true, there's been a lot of discussion going on covertly, and the planes have actually somehow made their way into the country. They probably didn't want to telegraph it, for one thing. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say we're going to deliver 29 planes on such and such a date to Liev, right? That's just, why give the Russians that amount? But this is huge. In addition to the Switchblades are now, there's about 700 Switchblades we've dealt with. These are very deadly drones that the United States has given to Ukraine and trained a number of Ukrainians in. More surface-to-air missile systems are being sent by several countries, including Norway. Last week, Slovakia sent some. And as we enter this new phase, I guess the big question is are the Russians going to do anything different or accomplish anything different than they did up by Kiev? So far, they just seem to be losing tanks again and vehicles. But what is going to be the impact of national politics, especially if it turns out that Biden did broker some type of deal covertly, or his people did, to get these planes to Ukraine, and it makes a big deal in terms of fighting the ground troops, since Russia doesn't have any air superiority after 56 days of fighting. Dave.
Yeah, I think we've talked in the past about a couple of elements here that are at play. One is that, I think big picture, the president of the United States has to walk a tightrope when it comes to making every possible attempt not to escalate into a regional war, because our NATO allies are the next line of defense. As soon as you cross over from Ukraine and you go a little bit further west, you get to Poland and some of the other countries that are NATO allies. So a regional war is effectively a world war. So that's I think the first principle here. That then the question is, you're talking about the impact on American politics. So as long as the United States is doing a little bit less than maybe it could be, it opens up the administration and senior leadership to the criticism of not doing enough. So they're left with the bully pulpit, the big stick threat, but also as much as we can possibly, the alliance of the Western countries could possibly do. So that's the big picture context. And your question, I guess, is, what's the impact on our politics? A lot of what you hear.
And just
Yeah, go
to,
for it.
to add to it before you go into it, Republicans and some Democrats have been pressuring Biden, send those planes, get
Exactly.
those planes into Ukraine.
Yeah.
If he's accomplished that, what's the impact?
Yeah, so you that was my next sentence. Actually, was like exactly that there's a lot of pressure to do everything in our power to facilitate Ukraine being able to defend themselves, and knowing that it's a technologically superior military that they're facing. At least that's the premise. That
Right.
they're what the West can do is give Ukraine more material, like and more commitments about to try to cut off Russia's ability to fund its war machine,
Mm-hmm.
to come up with some basic stalemate that would benefit the status quo, meaning that Russia doesn't get to impose its will on the fate of Ukraine's people and its sovereign capacity to exist in light of all the rhetoric about how maybe they ought not from Putin. I think one of the before I get into some of the specifics of what has changed, one thing we talked about last week is that Russia does have a really historic military holiday on the May 9th. So by hook or crook, Putin has to claim some kind of victory, and I think that does not bode well for the people of the Donbass region that happen to be in areas where they're under threat. So what has changed? Well, there has been a ratcheting up of the support. So, for example, there's been a next wave of supplies from U.S. and allies, including heavier weapons, which is, like you said, there's been a call to give heavier weapons. U.S. artillery, we gave a whole artillery battalion with 40,000 rounds, which is enough for 2 weeks of continuous bombardment. That's no small contribution.
Yep.
Also, we've given them Russian helicopters that they already know how to fly. UK's given a whole battery of anti-tank missiles, air defense systems. Netherlands has given them air defense systems and armored vehicles. Norway has given unspecified aid. Australia's given armored personnel carriers, and this undisclosed aircraft that you've talked about seems to be a major accomplishment because the United States can't possibly guarantee a no-fly zone, but a set of 20 or so fighter jets has immense capacity to really patrol their border well.
And not only that, attack the ground troops in Donetsk.
Yes. So one other element of this is that Ukraine won't get an edge, but they'll be able to fill the shortage that they have to fight from a position of with the material that they need. Also, there's been some reports that Ukrainian troops have left the country, some of them to be trained in the West on some of the more advanced systems. So there is a plan for the future if Russia, for example, to try to preempt some kind of major air invasion, because I hate to say it this way, but obviously they could use overwhelming force if they chose to. Yeah, I do like the idea of us hashing this out because
Yes.
I feel like I didn't give you a chance to respond on the military side.
So we'll take a little extra time on this topic as we're getting to the close. Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, there is a lot to consider there, and if it turns out that after all this pressure, and the Republicans started to call him a wimp because he wasn't giving them the planes, and then all of a sudden he did it, and then comes out and says, yeah, and I'm not going to telegraph it to Russia. I'm not going to just go and to announce when I'm going to do it. I got him the planes, and I did it. And I'm the adult in the room here. I mean, it is a new narrative, and I'm going to make a prediction at the end of the show as to another move that Biden may make here. But definitely, I mean, and see, the problem the Russians have is they're not changing their strategy. They still got these big long lines, traffic jams of stuff on the roads that are just being attacked, and everybody's saying, why isn't there a big attack? The Ukrainians don't need to do a big attack. They need to take one out here, one out there. It's a guerrilla warfare until they actually get there. So the successes so far haven't really helped Biden because of the inflation and because of certain things. But if he takes credit, is able to take credit for that, it will have an enormous impact on politics. Everybody loves a winner. And if he's pulling this off and sending more stuff and doing it the right way, because if nobody knows what country did it or anything, Putin will get a little bit of his own medicine back, because Putin denied the whole time that he had troops in Crimea, remember? And how do you press somebody to get troops out that he's not even acknowledging? And Biden's going to say, what planes? Oh yeah, look at that, they got planes. How did that happen? Right? I mean, they're going to play the same games, and that will be a big difference, because Russia does not have air superiority. At that point, they can't seem to defeat the Ukrainian planes. You brought it up on the past shows about how they couldn't do that. So this could have an enormous impact here and there. And they're even talking about, not only defending Donetsk, they shouldn't get ahead of themselves. They're talking about, God, maybe we can retake Crimea. Would Putin let that happen? I mean, that's a dangerous presumption there, but I'm going to let you close it out.
Yeah. So a couple things. One is more to the shorter timeline, because we have a weekly show. We can talk about the other long-term things later on, but the military analysts that you see in the various sources that are out there, they're talking about Russia outflanking the Ukrainian troops and making it so they can't resupply, and keeping them stuck close to the eastern edge of the Donbass by coming around from north and south. That way they could lock in this corridor that covers the Donbass all the way through Mariupol down through to Crimea. So that appears to be a short-term goal of Russia, to kind of lock in some gains as well as Crimea. And I'm sure I've mentioned this like a broken record, but Henry Kissinger himself during the Obama administration said that's Russia's warm water port. Crimea is the head where Russia's Navy is based. They're going to take it. It's a strategic imperative. There's two ways that conflict ends. There's diplomacy, and there's absolute complete domination and concession. Russia's never going to be absolutely dominated and conceded here under this leadership. So diplomacy is what we have to shoot for. And right now, both sides don't want diplomacy. I think they're fighting for a stalemate. I could be wrong, but that's just what it appears to me. And we could talk more about it. But economically speaking, even Europe is not unified around sanctions to do blockades or ending energy shipments. They're talking about maybe by the end of the year they could stop importing oil. Maybe by the end of next year they could stop importing gas. So there is a longer timeline, I think, in mind for a lot of folks.
Makes sense. All right. There's, we'll have to come back to this, because these things are going to develop rapidly, I think. We'll see. But that takes us to the next topic.
Friends, I'm proud to greet you from Ukraine, from our capital city of Kyiv, a city that is under missile and airstrikes from Russian troops every day, but it doesn't give up. And I have the honor to greet you on behalf of the Ukrainian people, brave and freedom-loving people who for 8 years have been resisting the Russian aggression. Those who give their best sons and daughters to stop this full-scale Russian invasion. Right now, the destiny of our country is being decided. The destiny of our people.
Okay, topic number 2, gas mandate. The mask mandate has been overturned by a judge, and there's questions as to whether or not Biden's going to appeal. I mean, as to whether or not this was even a popular thing. You had stewardesses, bringing garbage cans, asking people to throw their masks into the garbage can minutes after the decision was reported. Basically, the court decided that the CDC really doesn't have the authority to mandate that, it's possibly a very legally tenuous decision, but politically speaking, Biden really doesn't want to buck it politically and buck that tradition unless the CDC is going to come out with a real strong need for it, and explain exactly why, because CDC has been kind of vague and changing and waffling around these things. And if the CDC doesn't have a really good explanation as why he should expend what little political capital he has left on it, he probably is not going to file the appeal on it, especially since the mandates everywhere else are evaporating. So it's sort of like people take their chances on the airplanes, and maybe certain people just don't fly. Dave.
So this to me boils down to the judge basically, and I didn't read the whole 59-page ruling, but just from what I've seen, the summaries, etc., that the judge is saying that the CDC did not justify the decision, that the situation on the ground does not justify an emergency order of this nature. And one could argue that maybe during the beginning of this pandemic, possibly during the peak times throughout, there was justification, but really we're talking about right now. And so the judge's order needs to be refuted. So the CDC is probably going to appeal and try to say, no, they did have the power, but but it's no longer an emergency situation. So maybe we're splitting hairs here, but I think that this is just a stay of the ruling, and this is a ruling that they superseded their authority, but you could at this point the Justice Department could try to get a stay of the ruling if they could make the case effectively that it's still an emergency, which it doesn't appear to be.
That's the truth. I mean, it is a very tenuous legal decision because it's really not up to the court to decide what's emergency and what isn't. That's supposed to be the purview of the CDC to do that. The court would have to find an abuse of discretion in having done that, and did not use that term. Just said, no, it doesn't look like you've got the emergency there, so I'm going to overturn it. That's not what a judicial conservative judge does. It's really kind of uncharacteristic of a conservative judge to be doing this, to be deciding the policy for it. But the way the judge got out of it is said, well, you didn't really state the specifics enough, and therefore that's why I'm overturning it. Maybe if you make the case that there is an emergency, blah blah blah, but like I said, it's legally tenuous. But the Department of Justice, is Biden going to ask the Department of Justice to do the appeal? Maybe not. They are worried about the precedent, but maybe they'll just worry about the precedent next time around. It's not an appellate precedent, so it's not something that's binding, but it is tricky. And the politics of it are, people are not wanting to wear masks anymore. They want this to be over, even though there's still people dying, but they're not dying. Maybe they're dying more at flu-like levels than at the pandemic levels. And people want to think of this as over. And people in the CDC maybe don't, if that's their job, but this is the tough aspect of these politics. And I just don't think that Biden is going to want to expend political capital on it unless CDC has got some really good reasons. And that's the message he sent them.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. And just to kind of reiterate for folks, and this is for posterity's sake, the political context is that Omicron BA2 is on the rise. Reduced testing around the country is making it harder to know how accurate the numbers are. There is some wastewater testing that's happening in pilot areas around the country that's showing that there are increases out there, but it's not calibrated enough to give us a true picture. Even the CDC had to update their website when they started reporting on this. So that's kind of in its infancy. We're not seeing increases in hospitalizations. We're not seeing increases significantly in the death rate because a significant portion of the population is already vaccinated. And I would say due to the characteristics of this variant, not to get super in the weeds right now, we don't have time on that. It's not as lethal. It's not as potent for the majority of folks. There are lots of people who will wear masks because to them it's an important thing to protect themselves, their family, their clan, their community, whatever. But we're also competing that thought with the idea we're more aware of risks that come from loneliness and despair, sensitivity to the impact on child development, and just generally speaking, there's a lot of political resistance in the midterm election. So it's not a really good time for this fight.
Yeah, the only downside to it in terms of politically that could be long term is nurses are fed up. They're retiring. They're quitting. They're saying you're putting us at danger here, and they're threatening a strike in San Francisco, in California, possibly other places as well. And they're saying, we're the ones who've been carrying the load this whole time. We've been burned out because you filled up our ORs with your anti-vax nonsense, basically, and the anti resistance to it. And they're saying that's fine. You want to push this, but I'm not sticking around. I'm going to go do something else that's easier and maybe even make more money, go into a different type of practice. That's that is and that could have long-term impact, but will Biden get blamed for that? I doubt it. We'll see. So he's made that calculation. Anyway, more on that another time, but we got to go to our next topic. Okay, topic number 3. Gas prices have been dropping, although I did see an article today saying that they've been kind of inching up again a little bit. But while people aren't concerned, while the experts aren't concerned about that particular minor trend, they are concerned that as we get closer to summer, the prices are going to jump again, and especially if there's a heating up of any war, and especially if a lot of other things happen, such as Europe cutting off, actually being pressured, Germany being pressured to cut off oil sooner than they want to, meaning that there's now a bigger demand. Also, China seems to be winding down the recent kind of lockdowns for COVID, so they may be demanding more oil. So the prices over the next few months may be going up again. But it does appear that when Biden took the reserves and have been taking the reserves of million whatever it is, barrels a day and putting it into the market, that did have a positive effect in terms of lowering the prices. Gas prices are, even with the recent increase, about 30 cents lower than they were about a month ago. That is one of the biggest drives of inflation, as we've talked about, as everybody is talking about. So the question is what does Biden do in terms of the gas prices, and has inflation peaked? That's another kind of discussion. Not directly related to not only related to the gasoline, but also to the fact that there was a drop in price of used cars and some other items that may indicate that maybe it's at least the increased rate's going to go down even if prices don't drop real soon. Dave?
So yeah, this is one where I think you kind of touched on all the relevant short-term issue, not just short-term, but current data points that people are looking at. So whether, firstly, prices have stopped falling. They were falling in response to what appeared to be, attention being paid at the highest levels about, like you said, increasing some strategic reserve options, and just generally, China had 400 million people on lockdown, which is more people than we have in the entire United States. So that basically stabilized. They didn't continue to rise and somewhat came back. But we're talking about oil that, minimal changes in oil price at $100 a barrel. That's still far, far more than it costs to take out of the ground. So like I said last week, we're still talking about fear and greed. Unfortunately, and I hate to boil it down to something so simple. Yes, Russia's potential to disrupt global markets is real, but they also need the money. So they're pushing their oil out through major markets as best they can. There's an organization that tracks shipping, and they believe that Russia is actually selling oil for discount just to continue to evade sanctions. And I mentioned this I intended to mention this earlier. I don't think I did, but some of the sanctions that got ratcheted up this week are now more banks that are helping Russia evade. Some of the sanctions they're getting targeted. A new network of banks just got targeted. Cryptocurrency companies, one based in Switzerland, a Russian cryptocurrency company, they've gotten sanctioned. And like I said, Germany is saying we're going to keep buying through the end of the year and then beyond for gas. So there's not a sort of just like we talk about an off ramp in the Ukraine war. There's not really an off ramp for inflation right now when it comes to oil and gas, particularly because this demand, like you said, there's more demand every summer, which there's this natural cycle in our country for gas prices to go up. And really, we're talking ultimately in this topic, you wanted to talk about gas prices. So we are talking about the political consequences of people being frustrated by the high dollar amounts we're paying for everything. Gas is a key piece of that.
Yeah.
But when you compare to 2014, when you compare to 2008, it's not record gas prices.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So in a way, we've been there. We've done this before when there's been other crises. I expect that we'll see ups and downs throughout the year, and it's probably going to be really, really bad for this administration and the potential to maintain the House and the Senate with people so frustrated by what appears to be inaction on inflation.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the Senate. I'm not quite sure it'll have I think the Senate races are kind of locally determined more than a lot of the House races are. It's ironically speaking, just because because it has more to do with the individual candidates and the individual issues themselves, less than the trends. And this has happened before, where the House moves wildly, but sometimes the Senate even goes back towards the president during the midterm years. So, and we will be talking about that, and we have talked about it a little bit already, because some of the mistakes the Republicans have been making are choosing some really bad candidates to run and scaring other good candidates away because they don't want to do anything in Congress. So it's just so we've got that, but it is going to have an impact, and probably the House is going to be lost by the Democrats. It's just too close with anything. Now, there are some things that we're going to talk about in the next segment that might at least mitigate that, but it's but you're right. And yeah, inflation will probably, even if it peaks, it doesn't mean prices are going to drop all that much.
Exactly.
It's still going to be, high up there. And if gasoline is high, it means food will probably stay high, and certainly any food that you buy out of the area. And these are, this is difficult. This is difficult for a regime because they blame the president and the party in power no matter what. Period. It's what they do. Doesn't matter how much anybody tries to reason and say it's not any president's fault, or that they even have any power to do a whole lot about it. Again, we'll see. I mean, but I think there's going to be a shortage, even if the Russian-Ukraine war was to end tomorrow. There's still going to be a lot of issues because there's still going to be a lot of people that don't want to buy Russian oil. In fact, everybody's looking to be permanently off Russian oil. Of course, but they're not, as we discussed last week, not necessarily looking to get off oil, period. But that's, that's a longer term fight. Although Biden did announce that make some announcements today about the public land being used to mine lithium and other essential materials for those batteries. And there is possibly going to be a push for developing technology that doesn't require those exotic materials and refining. So, there is movement to it. I'm less depressed about it than I was last week, just because I am seeing some signs of movement. But anyway, plenty to say about it, but it does seem it doesn't seem very likely that the Democrats are going to be able to shake the specter of inflation for this election. It may ameliorate, by the time fall comes around. It might not be as big of a deal as it is. People might be even kind of used to it. And then if the prices start dropping, maybe they won't be as grumpy at the voting poll, but we'll see.
And so depending on which economists you listen to, I mean, some of them are really, they do a really good job of just explaining sort of in a cool-headed way. We were in a pandemic, effectively recession. We were in a pandemic, freeze of the economy for all intents and purposes. When you're comparing year over year numbers, when you've had a massive drop and you have a massive increase, the numbers look even worse. So the numbers, the nominal amounts are ugly. But on top of that, now that people are having more negotiating power when it comes to labor, that's increasing labor costs of all goods. Energy, shipping has not been resolved. Energy has not been resolved. Energy costs are 70% of food costs. Demand is still high. If people got more money in their pocket because they're making more money, you're still going to be trying to push the worm here. Try to get more and more goods from places that can't deliver. So there's just a lot of natural pressures on inflation. Plus the Fed is saying, hey, we're going to slow this economy down. We're going to increase interest rates across the board, not across the board. We're going to increase the Fed lending rate at 6 or 7 more times over the coming 9 months. And so there's a lot of pressure to slow down the economy eventually, but that's after the midterms by the time this really hits.
Yeah, it is. And one of the big things is going to be construction materials. And as we're starting to we did pass that one infrastructure bill last fall. Ironically, that may have an inflationary effect more so than planned, because they're going to be buying up the construction materials that are very rare and have gone up like ridiculous 58%. I think some of the metal and stuff like that, they're going to need to do that. So there's only so much we can do, but we will be talking about this a lot more in the future, obviously. Okay, this takes us, we are going to now discuss the midterms, and California is bound to have its own unique impact in the midterm results. As has happened before, I remember in 1994 when we had this Republican revolution, it stopped at the Bay Area. The Bay Area was the only place that actually took Republicans out of office during that wave. And this was, of course, the Clintons' first midterm, and that was probably one of the biggest losses of seats in the Senate and House. Probably it may not be that bad this time, but California tends to buck the national trends. And we do have a few things going on, even with this whole kind of semi-scandal going on with the governor. He's expected to win hands down easily re-election and be thinking about running for president someday. But the Republicans are hoping to get some of the other statewide offices. They are running aggressively for controller, for attorney general, hoping maybe they can tap into some type of dissatisfaction with Democrats to win one of those seats. And then they've got a number of people that they're targeting in the House. I believe Katie Porter was one. Julia Brownlee, Mike Levin, and Josh Harder, they are going to attack as vulnerable, especially since Katie Porter's under the redistricting is going to be a bit more vulnerable than it was. But Democrats are also targeting Republicans, some of them in the Valley, and including Young Kim, who is very vulnerable, David Valadao, Mike Garcia, Michael Steele, and Ken Calvert, 5 of them. And there's a good chance that the Democrats are going to net probably 3 or 4, possibly as many as 5 seats if they hold on to all the Democratic seats. So why would California buck the national trend here if there is this red wave that everybody's anticipating? Again, everybody, including 538, are discounting the new structure of the elections here and the turnouts. What happens is the Democrats tend to get discouraged in these midterms, and they tend to be disillusioned with their party, and they tend to not vote, and the turnouts tend to be low. But we've got a built-in structural system here that makes it the turnouts aren't aren't going to be very low necessarily, because everybody gets a ballot a month before the election, and then it's up to the Democrats to get people to hound people, basically, to get them in the mail. And so again, there's a really good chance that we're going to have a high turnout. Just the same reason that the recall effort last summer got just buried. It wasn't just lost. All these polls that showed it was that the recall might pass, that it was going to be close, and it wasn't even close. I think by the time it was all done, it was just under 20 points difference, which was like higher than almost all of the polls and the rest. And it's because of this format of everybody receiving a ballot. And then you got a month to coax them out there, even if they're disillusioned. You've got a lot of time to work on them specifically, and it's not that hard. You don't have to get them to the poll on election day. You just got to get them to stick the thing in the mailbox. It's not, they don't have to put a stamp on it after they do it. So, looking at that, I don't think the Republicans are going to take Attorney General or Controller, and maybe they'll take out one or two of those Democrats, but they're probably also going to lose 3 or 4 of their own. I'm projecting a minimum of 3 net gains Democrats because of this. Maybe I'm overly bullish on that, but Dave, I'm going to let you check in now. I've been talking.
Yeah, no, this was great, and I appreciate your insights, because you got your finger on the pulse better than most people. Period. Hard stop, right? So I just want to add to the context here. You talked about the structural situation, but if this was the same structure in, say, Wyoming or Alabama, it wouldn't be the same situation. So a lot of what matters in terms of the relative accuracy of what you said, the anticipated accuracy, is that the Republican Party's been in decline in this state for a while now.
Long time.
I looked in Politico fairly recently, and they had said that statewide GOP registration is now under 24% of the population. It's about 47% Democrats people. 47% of people are registered Democrats in California, and then the vast majority of the rest are independents who lean Democratic.
Right.
So a turnout exercise, or even an issue exercise, either way, it cuts in favor of Democrats having an advantage.
Yes.
So
if in other words, get them out.
Yeah, Republicans are on the wrong side. Not that my judgment, but according to the majority of the state, the Republicans are on the wrong side in both policy and in head count. So that works against them in many ways. So I thought that a good way to one more structural element, which is important. In the last 2 U.S. Senate races, the November ballot included only Democrats,
right,
because there were no GOP candidates who finished in second place to earn that.
Right, with our unique primary systems.
Yeah, exactly. So that also is a way to get a sense of the imbalance within the state. Basically it's 2-to-1 in registered voters. So what two statewide races that I thought of would be good examples for this is Governor Gavin Newsom, right? So he's got over $25 million in his war chest. Most of the people who ran against him in the recall decided not to run against him this time around, and the Republicans. And so even San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, he just decided the day before the deadline that he wasn't even going to enter the race. So there's some headwinds that have to do with inflation, homelessness, and so there are issues that could bring him some negative feedback. But the truth is that really it's his. It's going to be like a walk-off homer basically for him. Apparently, that's really what it seems like. And there
are also 2 Senate races this time around, because Harris's seat has to actually go to election in the next time that was available. So we'll be actually voting on 2 senators.
So Padilla, the one I was going to say is Senator Padilla, who was appointed, like you said, but he is, the person that's running against him, Mark Mauser. He that's who Padilla beat when they ran for Secretary of State in 2018. So he sort of already has a track record of beating him as a candidate. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about the other Senate race. I don't know
the one about with Feinstein. I mean, I don't know. I don't think a lot of people are aware of Dianne Feinstein's the fact that she's actually had some interesting moments in Congress. I think she's got the machine behind her, the money behind her, everything. I think she'll probably win it, but she may have a Democratic opponent, as the progressives, put out. I mean, for that reason, and it'll be an interesting campaign that way. I mean, there could be 4 Democrats in November running for Senate.
I haven't investigated it too closely, but I know in the last week since we talked last, my inbox and just different things that have been getting pushed to me, there's really a smear. I would call it a smear campaign. Maybe some people are saying they're whistleblowers, but that Senator Feinstein is reached the point in her life where she's past her prime and arguably suffering from mental frailty that may disqualify her from the full endorsement that she's earned throughout her career. That at this point people are starting to have, I think, second thoughts about if she's someone who would still be that we would want there. So, for example, one of the reasons why is people are saying that she just doesn't remember things and she doesn't remember people, and it's really hard for her staff to continue to do their job, and it's happened to other senators in other times, so it's not like this is unique, but it is something that's a little upsetting, and it might be just a wild card in what transpires going forward.
Well, she definitely has had some moments that are scary in Congress, and we'll talk about that another time. But we'll talk about who's developing as her primary opponent. We'll see. But in the meantime, that takes us to our last topic.
I, Richard Milhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Okay, for the last topic, we're going to talk about something that is dear to my heart, and that is class politics and the Democrats, and whether or not we've actually had discussions on this show, but also whether or not the Democrats have basically sacrificed class politics over the years for a type of cultural stance that seems to get in the way of its relationship with the Democrats. We also talk about messaging, and that's why I want to refer everybody to an article that kind of inspired this topic. It is in Politico magazine, Opinion, How Orwell Diagnosed Democrats' Culture War Problem Decades Ago, and he wrote an excellent book called The Road to Wigan Pier. It's been a few years since I've read it. I actually want to pick it up again, but in it he talks about how the reason socialist ideas are actually very popular in this country, but the left culturally just has always had a hard time really appealing to the people that it's trying to embrace, especially socialists. And Orwell wrote, I am making the case for a sort of person who is in sympathy with the fundamental aims of socialism, but who in practice always takes flight when socialism is mentioned. We can't use the word and we can't talk about it, but as we've discussed in the past, a socialism, every system has it. I mean, a fire hydrant that's publicly owned is socialism, right? I mean, a public police force, any public land, certainly, any roads themselves, even if you narrowly define socialism in terms of ownership of the means of production, roads are means of production. We couldn't do a whole lot without them, right? So, I mean, we do have socialism in this country, just as every system has a little bit of capitalism or free market. There is no pure system. It's a spectrum in a lot of ways. But But we have a hard time making that case because on the left, we have a hard time talking to working class people. And it's become harder and harder over the years, especially as we have a lot of academic notions as to how we're supposed to talk about different people in different ethnic groups or pronouns and things like that. We just haven't made the sale on it in terms of the average person who does not have a college education has never had the benefit of taking a real critical race theory course. I'm not talking about what they're saying is taught in the high schools, but I mean, really able to read the materials that are put out by Derek Bell he's passed away. So the question here is, we don't know how to talk to working class people, and yet we traditionally have been the working class party, and that's been a real big problem because whenever we get into the culture war, the Democrats and progressives lose because we don't know how to talk to them. And Orwell talked a bit about that, and I'm going to, Dave, let you jump in here.
So I'm really glad you flagged this article. I had seen someone else refer to the book, The Road to Whig and Peer, recently. Matt Taibbi, who's really bright writer. He's on Substack now, but he used to write for Rolling Stone magazine. He talked about how Orwell really anticipated the culture war, going to Northern England at a time where people were facing near starvation wages, working to death in the mines, and saying, hey, these folks are ripe for the benefit of social safety net. But if you mention socialism, it's deaf ears. Nobody even wants to talk to you. There's a disconnect, and that sort of anticipates culture war.
Yeah. Of course, he was doing it during the Cold War.
Yeah.
And it's not quite as negative as it was before, but it's still a negative word.
Yeah, and so I'm going to defer. Like I these ideas came from this Politico article that you said, so I am not claiming this as my own idea, but I think it's really important to highlight. Consider Orwell's argument that the language of the left is wholly distant from the language of ordinary citizens, right? So that's kind of the point that he's making, is that even if you have an idea that people agree with, people, generally speaking, consider the left to be preachy and judgmental. Yes. And another quote here, which is great, was former Democratic Montana Governor Steve Bullock. He described the image of his own party as coastal, overly educated, elitist, judgmental, socialist, a bundle of identity groups and interests lacking any shared principles. The problem isn't the candidates we nominate, it's the perception of the party we belong to. So whether it's, people, like you said, people broadly support things like a fair wage for a hard day's work and affordable access to healthcare and medicines and access to skills training that is required to have those jobs and to thrive in a modern society. Programs that are paid for by taxes paid from the richest among, majority of taxes are already paid for by the richest of folks in our country. So it's really a poignant message, and I have a couple other things, but from what I'd like to sort of have you address, if you don't mind, is you talked about like defund the police. So it's really language. So much of this is language and coming at it from the perspective that we are in the same group. We are from the North Coast. We are from California. We want to make things better here, as opposed to the adversarial approach.
We've had now 2 election cycles where we've shown that it's just absolute disaster, to use that term. And as I've argued before, when you have to come out, when you've got this slogan and you got to come right out the gate and say, and by the way, defund doesn't really mean defund, that it means something else, you give it up. But the problem with the left isn't just the fact that we have this language that we're out of touch, but we are entrenched in it. Well, some black activists said, you use the term, and it's not up to me as a white liberal to second guess them for the term, not to, forget about the fact that working class black voters across the country are rejecting it because of that, because they live, a lot of them, in communities where there is a lot of crime and do not want to see police defunded, because, they would love to see the other programs funded, but rather take it from somewhere else, not the police. Take it from the rich people. You can do it that way. But the left refuses to give it up. There's still a couple Congress people saying, "Well, no, I'm sticking with defund the police. It is as a matter of principle." Well, it's failed. It's why we're losing Latino voters, Black voters, and of course the white working class voters that we've been having a hard time having the whole time. This is just one example of terminology that we refuse to use, even when we've gotten slammed back and forth for it, because we just are, we're kind of in a bubble, a cultural bubble. And we say, well, we don't want to buck the African American activists, but the African American activists we're talking to are coming from university educated situations. They also are out of touch with the working class. You can't say that, but it is true because the entire left is, and it's a problem. And yet you will still see people saying defund the police.
It's interesting to me. I haven't gone as far as I'd like to go in speaking to the people in Oakland who I've been introduced to, who are strongly still supporting that phrase. But to paraphrase them, their situation that they encounter is still, when you drive outside of the Oakland city limits and you go into the outer county, you're going to experience a relationship with those police folks who want you to get back into the city because you look different, and maybe their systems in those communities are gonna allow them more leeway in enforcing that bias towards having their perceptions.
I think you'd have better luck if you said punish police racist. I mean,
exactly. So I'd like to go down this road a little.
And that's a bad slogan too, but still.
Well, accountability for our actions. If we live within the values of a safe community where we can all thrive and prosper without risk of being preyed upon by folks who are exploitative of their situation because they happen to be physically stronger or a little bit quicker or a little bit better at picking locks and turning off alarms. If you're getting exploited physically or economically, then you want a strong police force. But if it's the police department who's taking advantage of, then suddenly there's a new problem. But this is a little separate. We're a little bit off topic.
It is. We're off topic. We're talking about language and trying to relate to the people that we're trying to liberate.
Yeah, and so Latinx is another one, which I think is really fascinating. And I know we're basically out of time, but I think it's a great example. Apparently 2% of the Latino population in the United States supports Latinx. 45% are strongly rejecting of that term. So there's a lot of room for improvement in crafting language that is both effective and inclusive.
Especially since X isn't even used in the language. But we'll talk. We're going to come back to this. Maybe we'll do a part 2 to this next week.
Okay.
This brings us to the last part of our show. As always, we try to provide predictions that may or may not come true. But Dave, go ahead. What have you got?
This week, I recently saw the Washington Post published a list of the top 10 candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2024, which kind of by definition also means you need to look to who might be number 2 on that list, because they might, or 3 or 4, because they might end up being the vice president on the ticket. So I'm not going to go through the entirety of the list, but the interesting element of this that I saw was that, of course, Joe Biden, if he chooses to be the Democratic candidate, he's the sitting president, he's number 1. But the interesting part is that it used to be Kamala Harris as number 2, but now it's Pete Buttigieg. So Buttigieg's popularity within the donor class has gotten so high that they're already starting to manipulate the situation through media, through staffing, through perceptions. And sure enough, the Washington Post team that came up with this list has decided Harris has actually slipped to number 3. Elizabeth Warren's number 4, and then some of the other candidates who ran for president last time, also Gavin Newsom's on the list, and also AOC. So that's just in terms of popularity down at the bottom. But the important key thing here is Bernie Sanders is not on that list because people thought that he isn't going to run because he's going to be so, his age will be just too high. But he's not that much older or in the same ballpark as Joe Biden, right? So today, Bernie Sanders' team floated out there. He has not completely ruled out a run for office because conversations already started popping up. Well, he's not on the list. Is Elizabeth Warren going to be the progressive standard bearer? Right. Is Ro Khanna going to be the progressive standard bearer? So my prediction is that Bernie Sanders will actually decide that he's going to use that bully pulpit and he's going to be out there trying to fight the good fight to keep the Democratic Party in alignment with some of the activists.
Okay. I'll be really quick with my time here. I did mention before I had a prediction about the war in Ukraine. Boris Johnson, of course, made a surprise visit to Kiev, or before earlier in the month. There have been kind of pressure on Joe Biden to do, and Zelensky said that he is convinced that Joe Biden is going to show up. But the White House issued a statement saying there are no plans for Joe Biden to visit Kyiv, and then there was a little bit of talk here and there, and Psaki's statement later was, "We are not walking back the statement that there are no plans that Joe Biden is going to go to Kyiv." If the war goes well for the Ukrainians in Donetsk as it did in Kiev, and things are going pretty well, you may see Biden make a surprise. I am predicting that he's going to not want to be one-upped by Boris Johnson. That he's going to make a surprise visit, and it'll boost in order to boost his ratings and everything else. Taking a few chances there as always, but that he will actually make an appearance in Kyiv, and that will, and probably not tell anybody ahead of time. So again, that's just looking at the way things are being worded. Yeah. That's just my prediction, and we'll see. Anyway, that takes us to the end of the show. As always, it goes so quickly, and there's so much more we could have discussed on those topics, plus a couple of other topics. But until next time, stay engaged and stay informed and stay engaged. Thank you.